Going to create business opportunities, I think, which is really important, especially around those metro stops. There might be, offices, hotels, big opportunity to lease some property.
Hi, I'm Sarah Forster, news editor here at The National, and thank you for joining me for this week's episode of A Closer Look. Now, as we all know, Dubai's population continues to boom, and as to be expected, the government are developing various ways to handle this expansion. Now, one of those is by upgrading the metro network. We had a huge announcement this week, and to talk with me more about it, we've got our senior reporter, John Dennehy. John, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So I've given away a little bit that it is about the metro, this announcement. It was made on Sunday. Why don't you just explain to us exactly what the news was?
So Dubai laid out some very ambitious proposals to massively increase the number of metro stations from about 50 up to about 140 by 2040. So a really huge expansion of the public transport network in Dubai.
Okay, and are these going to be just like any regular old metro stations, like a bus stop kind of, you just get on, get off, or is there a bigger plan for them?
Well, I think usually in the past we've thought of bus stations and train stations as places where, as you said, you simply get on and off and then you forget about it. But what the plan is envisaged here is places where you really would be able to have a coffee, have a meal. Maybe there might be offices there. There could be almost like mini malls. And a good example is kind of maybe what you would see in Tokyo, where metro stops have also become their own kind of world in itself, where people are working, where people are socializing. So they're almost like places to hang out. So that is the long-term plan, to move away from this really purely just functional role, although that is still very important, but to move away from that sort of functional role into something much more broader.
And I know you compare it to Tokyo. I would compare it a little bit to a train station that I went to in Washington, D.C. once, Union Station, which had a cinema in it and it had restaurants, and people literally just went there, not to catch a train, but just to go and hang out and pass the time and whatnot. So this would be, so let's talk about the subject, right? About some challenges that will be faced trying to add all of these metro stations to Dubai. So something that's been commented before by experts is that when new metro stations are built, sometimes they're just built on the outskirts of communities because it's easier to just stick them out there and then you don't really sort of interrupt anything. What do you think this is a way of combating that, of basically building the station first and then maybe the community then evolves around it?
Well, it's a complex area, and it's hard to understand where exactly the stations will be and the plans for some of them. But in Dubai, I think there's a lot of answers to that point. I mean, I think on the very first broader level, the metro has been a massive success. I mean, in 2009 there was a huge amount of skepticism about whether this will work. People say no one's going to take it. People will stay in their cars. It's just been a victim of its own success. It's hugely popular, So and you can see that during the floods when it was disrupted, it really caused a lot of problems. But at the same time, when there's a big event on, like say COP last year, you can see the metro was just completely rammed. But to answer your question, if you look at the metro going up the Sheikh Zayed Road, I mean, the example is obviously Dubai Mall, where you have to walk a long time to reach the mall from the station. I mean, it's air-conditioned walk, it's not so bad. But
thank goodness for those travelators, because they really speed that walk up.
It's a big walk. I mean, it's not too hard, but it's still a long way to go. The idea would probably be to try and make it more accessible and more integrated, and particularly if these are places where there are restaurants and cafes and places to hang out. It also keeps people in that area. How integrated they'll be into residential communities, we'll have to see, especially with the construction of the Blue Line starting this year. That's going to connect some of these major communities.
Well, let's talk about the Blue Line, because we announced this, was it last year? Massively popular story, because it's going to serve an area of Dubai previously not served by metro. What happens to an area when you suddenly put a metro station in it?
Yeah, so the Blue Line construction is expected to start this year, adding a lot more metro stations again, and it's going to connect some of the big residential areas that haven't been connected before. So you've got International City, you've got Dubai Creek Harbour, Mirdif, obviously hugely popular area, and then connect also up to the existing lines. So how that will be integrated into these huge communities is going to be interesting to see, and interesting how it plays out. But we've been reading about these plans for the metro stops for a while now, and we know that the firm plan is to try and integrate them, not just to the communities, but also to the wider transport networks. Like, I mean, I'd point to Etihad Rail. We know there's a passenger service going to connect Abu Dhabi and Dubai. Those stations will also be in some shape or form connected to metro stops and existing public transport infrastructure. So the idea is to link it up and not have them as kind of islands in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, Dubai does look a lot in advance. So you have, for example, the airport's going to switch down to Dubai South, right? So there's already a metro stop down there. At the same time, the other way of looking at it is what's going to happen to maybe the lineup around the existing airport when that moves away. How they will integrate that with the new developments. So, but the thing is, the infrastructure's already there, so it does make it a lot more helpful.
Yeah, and so this might seem like an obvious question, but let's answer it just for fun. What benefits would loads more metro stations make to Dubai? I'm thinking like across the board.
It's obviously going to help with congestion. That's going to be a really huge thing. It's going to create business opportunities, I think, which is really important, especially around those metro stops. There might be offices, hotels, big opportunity to lease some property, and it's also going to be good for pollution. It's going to cut pollution and cut emissions, which is also really, really crucial too.
Yeah, I think I'll speak just from my experience. I think also just the benefit to the well-being, just mentally of people knowing that they don't have to sit in traffic for ages, and also just the concentration of driving as well. When I lived in London, I used to take the metro to work, and I could read a book, and you can actually do things rather than sit just sort of behind your car the whole time. So.
I mean, when the metro was built initially, I mean, you can really argue that planners were too cautious. I mean, given the success of it, and this happens around the world a lot. Like people say, it's not going to work, but actually they could have built 4 or 5 lines, and they would have been just as popular. So, it's a good insight into the planning.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Well, you'll have to watch this space to see how these developments go. As John said, work on the Blue Line is going to start this year, so we'll keep you updated with that. But otherwise, John, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks very much.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of A Closer Look, brought to you from right here inside the National's newsroom in Abu Dhabi. Don't forget, all of our previous episodes can be found on our YouTube channel.